For more on the preliminary deal, or what's being called a framework on trade between the world's two largest economies, we are joined now by Alex Capri. He is a senior lecturer of NUS Business School, and he is live from Spokane in Washington. So, Alex, thanks for your time. So this framework really being reached after 2 days into those fresh talks. I mean, are you surprised at the speed? And what do you think were the drivers that kind of pushed them to hash something out so quickly?
I think this remains a very fluid situation. And what is interesting here is the attention is now shifting away from tariffs to very strategic supply chains like rare earths and magnets, which, of course, China dominates from a supply chain perspective. And also, I think on the flip side to that, discussion around U.S. dominance of semiconductor supply chains. So I'm sure that was discussed in the meetings. So I think it's going to be really more and more the new normal to see a linkage between tariff discussions and discussions about strategic supply chains, such as rare earths and semiconductors.
Okay, on that point, Alex, are we seeing signs of resource nationalism, so to speak, where strategic commodities are no longer just traded, but weaponized to gain geopolitical trade advantage?
Absolutely. And that is something that's here to stay. So I think the discussions that we're seeing today are short-term, sort of immediate crisis management, figure out how to keep the supply chains moving. But at the same time, the mid to the long-term trajectory will be that China and U.S. strategic supply chains will continue to bifurcate, will continue to decouple. But that's when it comes to rare earths and critical minerals, and the efforts by the U.S. and its allies to reshore and nearshore those supply chains, we're talking about a 5 to a 10-year timeline there, right? But make no mistake about this. In terms of the very key strategic technology stacks between China and the G7++, those supply chains, value chains for materials, data, and increasingly people are going to continue to decouple and to bifurcate.
So who holds the stronger hand in this sort of resource standoff then, Alex?
Again, we're in this paradox, right? We're grappling with the reality, which is essentially that over the last 3 to 4 decades now, we've had this intermingling of these very critical supply chains between major trading partners, U.S., China, and others. And as nations now carve out very specific portions of those supply chains, again, rare earths, things like critical minerals, semiconductors, quantum, biotech, aerospace, advanced materials for manufacturing, et cetera. That's a process where we're looking at a very fluid situation day to day, and we're looking at a very transactional world, certainly under the Trump 2.0 administration, where tariffs, export controls, sanctions, all of these things are going to be lumped together now in trade-related discussions and commercial discussions.
Right. Alex, so you talked about, this being a new normal with more and more shifting to more to rather looking at these strategic areas. And so in this case, rare earths, critical minerals. What about countries that don't have these rare earths or strategic minerals, or they don't have what is seen as a strategic focus point for the U.S.? I mean, what does this mean then for their tariff negotiations with the U.S.?
Well, unfortunately, as the U.S. and China shift to much more of a bilateral focus when it comes to negotiating their national interests, whether it's trade, whether it's access to food security, energy security, technology security. Unfortunately, for the middle tier countries that don't have that same kind of bargaining power, don't have the same kind of resources or critical mass when it comes to these very important supply chains, those countries are gonna have less choice. They're going to be they're going to be pushed into positions where they're not going to be able rather to leverage a lot of things like the bigger countries when it comes to negotiating a trade deal, whether it's over tariffs or whether it's over access to supply chains. So it's an unfortunate thing then for the smaller middle tier countries.
Yeah, so does this mean that these smaller middle tier countries will be at a disadvantage when it comes to the negotiations?
If it's negotiations on a one-to-one basis, or yes. Now, what's in the best interest of middle tier countries is to build as many relationships as possible, right? To forge as many minilateral agreements, to get involved in as many minilateral agreements, whether it's a trade agreement, whether it's a supply chain resilience agreement, some kind of an arrangement around any kind of a strategic supply chain. Smaller countries are going to be looking to position themselves and connect themselves with as many opportunities and as many outlets as possible.
So Alex, now that there appears to be a framework in place, just how hopeful are you, though we could see some sort of a deal soon between the U.S. and China? And given that there is no set date for the next round of talks, should we interpret this as a sign of caution, unresolved issues? What's your take?
Well, look, I think it's important to realize that this remains a very fluid, a very contentious relationship. In the past, historically, negotiating a proper free trade agreement literally took years, right? Because there are so many moving parts. There are so many elements across the tariff schedule, so many thousands of different parts and components made by so many different stakeholders that generally should have input. And that takes a lot of time. So I think in this very transactional, almost made for TV kind of negotiations that are done very quickly, in and out over a couple of days, I don't think that that's going to leave us in a position where we're going to have these long-standing, long-lasting agreements. I think we'll continue to see more transactionalism, and we'll probably see more and more of these types of shorter one-on-one type of meetings that remain a work in progress. So I think as long as they're still talking, they're still keeping things professional, they're keeping things civil and diplomatic, that's a good sign.
Okay, Alex, we'll have to leave it there for now. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Alex Capri, a senior lecturer of NUS Business School.